Welcome to our deep dive for today. And to you, our listeners, since we know you're a high school student with a real interest in social history and law, we're so glad you're joining us for this one.
Yeah, we've got a fascinating stack of source dossiers today. We're going to be unpacking the Education Amendments of 1972.
Right. Specifically, those famous 37 words of Title IX.
Exactly. And our mission today is to look at this history not just as like a list of court cases, but through a very specific lens.
Yeah, we want you to imagine viewing all of this through the eyes of an educator who is literally walking the school hallways and just, witnessing the dramatic transitions of the 1970s.
Because that's where history actually happens.
In the hallways.
Exactly. But to start, we actually need to take you outside the hallway. It's a Tuesday afternoon in the fall of 1969.
Okay, set the scene for us.
Right. So we are standing on the banks of a river in Northern California at Stanford University, and we're watching the men's crew team row by.
The water is churning, the oars are moving in like absolute unison. You've got these 8 massive, incredibly fit guys pulling through the water with just everything they have.
It's a very physically demanding sport.
Right, but if you look closely at the stern of the boat, sitting there, facing them, the person who is actually steering the shell isn't one of the guys.
Right.
It's a young woman, a female classmate who just, stepped up to fill a vacant role.
Because they needed someone.
Exactly. And she isn't just sitting there enjoying the ride. She is commanding the entire operation. She's reading the water. She's calling the rhythm of the stroke, executing the whole tactical plan for the practice.
Which is, that requires an immense amount of specialized skill.
It really does. It's grueling, high-stakes athletic work, and she's doing it flawlessly.
Yeah, to really grasp the mechanics of a collegiate crew team, you kind of have to understand the role of the coxswain.
Right, the person steering.
Exactly. The 8 oarsmen, they provide the raw, sheer horsepower.
Yeah.
But the coxswain is basically the brain of the boat.
They don't even touch an oar, do they?
No, not at all. Their job is entirely tactical and honestly psychological. They steer the rudder, they monitor the stroke rate, and they act as this, on-the-water coach.
So it's not about being big or strong.
It's the one single seat in the boat that absolutely does not reward raw physical strength or, a massive wingspan. In fact, it rewards the exact opposite.
Because extra weight slows the boat down.
Exactly. The coxswain needs a sharp, commanding voice, rapid-fire tactical intelligence, and a very light physical frame. Any extra weight in the stern is just drag.
Which means a young woman is often, physically and strategically perfect for the role.
Completely perfect.
Yeah.
And on this particular Tuesday in 1969, the Stanford men's team was just short on bodies.
Right, because crew wasn't some glamorous thing back then.
No, not at all. It was not a prestige sport. It was an underfunded, gritty, low-prestige corner of the athletic department. So they needed a coxswain, and female classmates got in the boat.
They steered the practice. They managed the rhythm.
They did the exact same job under the exact same physical and mental pressure as any male coxswain would.
And here is where the reality of 1969 just kind of crashes down on them a few days later.
Right, because practice is one thing.
Exactly. They could do all that on a Tuesday afternoon during a grueling, sweat-soaked practice. But when Saturday arrived,
Race day.
When it was time for an official race against another university, those same women were explicitly legally barred from the boat.
It's just wild to think about.
It is. The institutional rules of the era essentially said a woman could steer a practice, but completely forbade her from steering a competition.
And that's where we get to the hook of this whole deep dive. Because a freshman oarsman named Nick McKenzie sees this happening. And he actually objects.
Right. He looks at this and is like, wait, this is absurd.
He realizes the woman can physically do the job. She's been doing it all week. She knows the crew trusts her, so why can't she race? So he actually speaks up and challenges the rule. And the reaction he gets, this is the key. It's what makes this story the perfect doorway into our topic today.
Because of how they responded to him.
Exactly. When he objected, nobody sat him down and outlined a logical, biomechanical, or tactical reason why a woman shouldn't cox on a Saturday.
He wasn't met with a debate.
He was met with a wall.
A total wall.
This historical records describing the incident note that his objection was just swallowed up by, quote, the settled weight of how things were done.
The settled weight of how things were done. Wow.
Yeah. The establishment was just the establishment. He was quietly but very firmly overruled by the sheer inertia of the status quo.
There was no need for the university to even justify the exclusion.
Right, because exclusion was just the default setting of the entire system.
This is how we do it, kid. Drop it.
Exactly.
And the reason we are starting here with this one small, unremarked closing of a door on a college river is because it perfectly illustrates the everyday machinery of exclusion in America before 1972.
It wasn't heavily defended because nobody thought to question it.
Right. It wasn't just that discrimination existed. It was that it was so ordinary, so totally baked into the architecture of everyday life, that the people turning the key in the lock didn't even think they needed to defend it.
Which brings us back to you, our listener. As a student of history, you know that history isn't just a list of dates and statutes.
No, it is lived experience.
Yes. So to truly understand the engine of the 1970s, imagine walking the halls of a typical high school, but viewing it as an educator working in 1971.
Okay, so we're walking out of the collegiate boathouse and into the everyday high school.
Right. You aren't looking at abstract legal theories. You're looking at the Bell schedule. You're looking at the standardized test scores, the counseling office, the gymnasiums.
Let's walk into that counseling office in 1971. Because that bolted door from the boathouse, it was everywhere.
It really was.
If you were an educator in that high school, the daily experience of sex discrimination wasn't some hidden conspiracy. It was literally the piece of paper handed to every single student at the start of the semester.
The class schedule.
The class schedule.
The mechanics of educational tracking in that era were just astonishingly rigid. Girls were systematically routed and, actively steered by the institution into home economics.
Right. They were taught to bake, sew, manage a household budget.
Meanwhile, they were outright barred from taking auto shop, wood shop, or machine shop.
Wait, barred. Like, not just discouraged, but barred.
Yes, it wasn't a strong suggestion from a counselor. It was a hard rule. You could not register for the class if you were female.
Which means, think about the economic reality of that. The system was creating this massive structural bottleneck regarding earning potential.
Absolutely.
Because if you can't take machine shop, you can't learn how to operate a lathe or how to weld. And in a 1970s industrial economy...
Those were the skills that led to stable, unionized, high-paying factory jobs.
Right. So by barring girls from the classroom, the school was fundamentally barring them from the middle class of the industrial workforce.
And this extended far beyond just a few elective classes in a comprehensive high school. Major cities operated specialized public vocational high schools.
Right, like entire campuses.
Entire campuses, funded by taxpayer dollars, dedicated exclusively to trades like maritime work, aviation mechanics, or automotive repair.
And let me guess.
Yep. Many of these public schools were reserved outright for boys. A young woman who wanted to be, say, an aircraft mechanic couldn't even submit an application
To a public school.
They legally denied her entry simply because they deemed the trade inappropriate for her sex.
It's like predicting a plant won't survive the winter, so you lock it in a dark closet.
That's a great way to put it.
And then when it wilts, you open the door, point to it and say, "See? I told you it wasn't strong enough to survive." It was a system that enforced its own predictions as rules. We don't think you belong in this field, so we are going to make it illegal for you to get the training.
It's the exact mechanism of systemic exclusion. And it wasn't just vocational trades either. The academic tracking was just as severe.
Right. The standardized testing.
The testing and the counseling systems were explicitly designed to nudge young women away from advanced mathematics and hard sciences.
So even if a girl was brilliant at math,
A young woman with a high aptitude for numbers would sit down with her guidance counselor and be told, "Look, advanced physics isn't really suitable. Have you considered teaching or nursing?"
or secretarial work.
Exactly. It was a constant nudging away from certain paths.
Which brings us to the absolute pinnacle of the educational system, the prestige professions, medicine and law.
Yeah.
So if you somehow made it through that gauntlet of high school counseling and you actually got a bachelor's degree and you wanted to be a doctor or a lawyer, you hit an even thicker wall.
Let's look at the actual demographics of these fields in 1972.
Okay, hit me with the data.
Women earned roughly 7% of U.S. law degrees,
7%.
and they earned about 9% of U.S. medical degrees.
Wow. And the fundamental question for anyone looking at those numbers today is why? Why 9%?
Right. Was it because only 9% of female applicants were intellectually capable of passing organic chemistry?
Or mastering constitutional law? Obviously not.
The historical records show definitively that this was not a capability issue. The reality is that many medical and law schools simply held women to a small, fixed, mathematically rigid quota.
A quota, so they would just cap it.
They would cap female enrollment at around 10%, or sometimes just a literal handful of seats per entering class.
So if a medical school class had 100 seats, they might just decide, we will admit exactly 5 women this year.
Exactly. Once those 5 seats were filled, the door was bolted. The 6th woman could have perfect grades, flawless test scores, and she would be rejected simply because the female quota was full.
It's unbelievable. And didn't some undergraduate colleges actually hold women to higher admission bars, too?
Yes. A female applicant might be required to have significantly higher standardized test scores and a higher GPA than a male applicant just to be considered.
Because of the assumption that she would just get married.
Exactly. The institutional assumption was that a woman's education would go to waste if she left the workforce to have kids. So they felt they had to be absolutely certain she was exceptional before giving her a seat that, frankly, a mediocre man might occupy.
Which perfectly brings us to Congresswoman Patsy Takemoto Mink. She is just a towering figure in this history.
Truly.
For our listener who might not know her, she was a congresswoman from Hawaii, actually the first woman of color ever elected to Congress. And she is the lead author of Title IX's. The statute is actually formally named the Patsy T. Mink Equal Opportunity in Education Act.
But decades before she was drafting federal legislation in Washington, she was a young woman applying to medical school in the late 1940s.
With a degree in zoology and chemistry, right?
Yes. Very qualified. She sent applications to more than a dozen medical schools, and she received more than a dozen rejection letters.
Did any of those schools actually admit why they were rejecting her? Because today, you'd get some vague HR language.
In that era, they didn't have to be vague at all. The administrative exclusion of women was perfectly legal and totally socially acceptable.
Oh, they just told her.
Some schools told her plainly that their quota for women was already full, or that they simply did not admit women under any circumstances. Her grades were stellar, but her sex disqualified her.
That experience of hitting that quota wall, of getting rejection after rejection solely because she was a woman, is what pushed her to pivot.
It changed her whole life.
She realized she couldn't break the medical establishment, so she went to law school instead.
And studied the law.
Yeah, it's such a profound historical irony. The medical school's refusal to admit her created the exact lawmaker who would eventually tear down their right to refuse anyone.
It is a remarkable full-circle moment. But before we get to the law she actually wrote, we have to look at the other ways the pre-1972 system functioned.
Right, because it wasn't just admissions.
No, the exclusion went deep into the basic societal rules governing a student's life. Consider the policies regarding pregnancy and marriage.
Oh, this part is just shocking.
If a high school student got pregnant, or even if she just got married before graduation, the standard procedure was routine expulsion.
That is just staggering to think about today. One life event, and your access to public education is just severed.
It's gone.
You were pushed out of the school system, totally off the educational path, and there was absolutely no federal legal recourse to stop it.
None. The principal could literally just call you into the office, say, "You're no longer welcome here," and your formal education was over.
And if you did manage to graduate, or if you were forced out and had to go looking for work, the segregation was printed daily in black and white.
The newspaper classifieds?
Yes. If you opened the Sunday newspaper in the late 1960s to look for a job, you didn't just see a single list of openings. The ads were explicitly sorted by sex.
You had 2 completely separate columns.
Right. One column literally read, "Help Wanted Male." And under that column, you found the management trainee jobs, the career track positions, the union trades.
The roles with upward mobility and high salaries.
Exactly. And the other column read, "Help Wanted Female." And that listed clerical work, secretarial roles, telephone operators, strictly lower-paying jobs.
The visual impact of that cannot be overstated. A young girl opening the paper learned exactly what her place in the world was supposed to be before she even typed a resume.
The ceiling was defined for her in print.
And even though the Equal Employment Opportunity Commission ruled in 1968 that this specific practice was illegal, it was so deeply entrenched in the culture that it persisted in many local papers for years afterward.
Because it was just how things were done. And of course, that brings us to the arena that would eventually become the most famous, visible battleground for this entire movement: sports. We talked about the rowing team at Stanford, but let's look at the national data. The National Federation of State High School Associations conducted their first comprehensive participation survey in 1971.
And the numbers are just a stark reflection of the culture. In 1971, nationwide, there were about 3.7 million boys playing high school sports.
3.7 million? The entire cultural phenomenon of Friday Night Lights, the Letterman jackets, the pep rallies.
It was a massive machine built for 3.7 million boys.
And the girls.
Roughly 294,000 girls played high school sports.
Wow. 294,000 compared to 3.7 million. That is more than a 12-to-1 gap.
And the opportunities that did exist for those 294,000 girls were heavily concentrated in just a few sports, often with very limited schedules and virtually zero funding.
Right. They wore hand-me-down uniforms. They played in secondary gyms at, odd hours. And athletic scholarships for women to attend college were practically non-existent.
And again, we have to ask why. What was the justification for this massive disparity? It wasn't just a lack of money.
No, it was a folk belief dressed up as medical science. The prevailing wisdom of the era was that hard, sustained athletic competition was physically dangerous for girls. Medical professionals seriously argued that jumping or running too hard could damage a woman's reproductive organs.
It was an ideology of protectionism that functioned as total exclusion.
It's the exact same contradictory logic from the river. A woman could handle the brutal physical stress of steering a crew boat during a Tuesday practice.
But somehow her nervous system couldn't handle the stress of a Saturday race.
Right. So if you are that educator in 1971, you're looking at a society where the class schedule, the vocational schools, the college admissions quotas, the newspaper classifieds, and the athletic fields are all structurally engineered to limit female participation.
That is the reality of the bolted door.
Which brings us to the revolution. Because if the pre-1972 world was defined by that bolted door, how did a piece of legislation containing just 37 words manage to break the lock?
This is where we have to look really closely at the text.
Yeah.
Because the Education Amendments of 1972 were a massive package of legislation. But the part that changed the world, Title IX, is incredibly brief.
It's tiny.
And the most startling fact for anyone who associates Title IX purely with college athletics is that those 37 words never even mention the word sports.
Not once. Let me read the exact text for you. No person in the United States shall, on the basis of sex, be excluded from participation in, be denied the benefits of, or be subjected to discrimination under any education program or activity receiving federal financial assistance.
That's it.
37 words.
And the power lies in that phrase, any education program or activity. It is sweeping. It is total.
Any program.
It means that the revolution didn't start on the soccer pitch or the basketball court. It started in the classroom, the admissions office, and the faculty lounge.
Let's talk about the protections that nobody ever puts on a poster. The quiet structural victories that changed millions of lives overnight. Let's go back to the issue of pregnancy.
Right. So in 1975, the Department of Health, Education, and Welfare issued the final regulations for implementing Title IX. And they made it explicitly illegal to expel or discriminate against pregnant or parenting students.
This completely rewired the trajectory of countless young lives.
Absolutely. Think about that teenager who got pregnant in 1968. She lost her right to an education, her future was derailed, her earning potential collapsed.
But after these regulations took effect, the law basically said, no, her education belongs to her.
Schools were legally required to give pregnant and parenting students equal access. They had to allow them to stay in their regular classes and provide reasonable accommodations for medical needs.
It secured their fundamental right to continue their intellectual development regardless of their marital or parental status.
That is a massive paradigm shift. But the law went even further because it didn't just protect the students sitting at the desks, it protected the people standing at the chalkboards.
Title IX covers the faculty and the staff.
Yes. If an institution receives federal funds, it cannot discriminate on the basis of sex in hiring, promotion, or pay.
And this introduces us to another vital figure in this deep dive, Bernice Sandler.
Yes. She is often referred to by historians as the godmother of Title IX.
And she wasn't an athlete fighting for a track scholarship.
No, she was an academic.
Mm-hmm.
In the late 1960s, she was teaching at the University of Maryland, finishing her doctorate, and she was repeatedly passed over for full-time faculty positions.
Did they give her a reason?
She was told plainly that she came on, quote, too strong for a woman.
Too strong for a woman.
Wow.
So she hits the exact same wall that Patsy Mink hit, just in a different hallway.
But Sandler doesn't just accept it. She starts looking for a crowbar. And what she finds is this brilliant, obscure legal mechanism. She realizes she can use contract compliance complaints to fight systemic sex discrimination.
Okay, we need a brief explanation of how federal funding works here to understand this.
Right. So during the Cold War and the space race, the federal government was pumping billions of dollars into universities for defense research, medical studies, and technological development.
So these universities were functionally massive federal contractors.
Exactly. And Sandler realized that President Lyndon B. Johnson had signed an executive order years earlier that forbade federal contractors from discriminating in employment.
Wait, I thought that order was about racial discrimination.
It was originally intended to fight racial discrimination in companies building missiles or paving highways. But Sandler read the fine print and realized it applied to universities receiving federal grants, and it had been quietly amended to include sex discrimination.
That is brilliant. So she didn't just file a standard lawsuit.
No, she filed administrative complaints with the Department of Labor, pointing out that universities practicing sex discrimination in hiring were violating their federal contracts.
Which means she was threatening to freeze their massive multi-million-dollar defense and research grants.
She found the financial pressure point.
She hit them right in the wallet.
She used that leverage to force the federal government to actually investigate the hiring practices of hundreds of universities. Her relentless work building these contract compliance complaints was foundational to building the political case in Washington that eventually led to the passage of Title IX.
The law fundamentally was born out of employment and academic grievances, not a desire to fund women's field hockey.
Exactly.
Okay, so the law passes. The 37 words go into effect. Any education program. Let's go back to those admissions quotas we talked about earlier. The 7% in law, the 9% in medicine.
Right. Title IX makes those sex-based admissions quotas federally illegal overnight.
A state medical school can no longer artificially cap women at 10%. So what happens? Let's trace the demographic flip, because this is where the history becomes incredibly tangible.
Well, the change wasn't instantaneous because pipelines take time to build, but it was relentless. As the legal barriers fell, the demographics of the prestige professions transformed at a historic pace. Let's look at law schools first. The historical data tracks a steady climb from that 7% baseline. Finally, in 2016, 4+ decades after Title IX passed, women became the majority of all students at American Bar Association accredited law schools, hitting 50.3%.
2016, that was the tipping point for the entire legal profession. And what about medicine?
Medicine followed shortly after. According to the Association of American Medical Colleges, 2019 was the watershed year. That was the first year that women became the majority of U.S. medical students, at 50.5%.
So from 9% to a majority, and the momentum hasn't stopped, right?
Not at all. If we look at the most recent data for the 2023 to 2024 academic year, women made up 54.6% of all U.S. medical school enrollees. For law schools, it was roughly 56%.
The historical poetry of those numbers is just profound. I mean, think back to Congresswoman Patsy Mink opening those dozen rejection letters in the 1940s, being told there was literally no room for her.
Title IX is quite literally the law answering her rejections a generation later.
She wrote the legislation that destroyed the system that turned her away. And today, women are the majority in the very rooms she was barred from entering.
It gives you chills.
It really does. The law reorganized the fundamental power structure of the country. It changed who holds the credentials, who gets to be the surgeon operating on you, who gets to be the judge ruling on your case.
But as students of history, we have to look at the whole picture.
Right. And the historical records point out a glaring anomaly. This is an unfinished revolution.
Yes. If we contrast the tremendous undeniable gains in medicine, law, and the biological sciences with other specific fields, we see a very different, very stubborn picture.
Especially in STEM.
Yes. In the most male-coded technical fields, specifically within computer science, engineering, and physics, the demographic needle has barely moved compared to the rest of academia.
The data from 2021 is incredibly sobering. Women earned only about 18% of computer science bachelor's degrees.
18%.
18%. Engineering and physics remain heavily, stubbornly male-dominated. So you have to be asking, if Title IX removed the legal barriers across the board, if the 37 words apply to any education program, why did medicine and law flip to a female majority, while a computer science lab or an engineering hall still looks like it's stuck in 1985?
This raises a crucial question about the limits of legislation versus the power of culture. The law is an incredibly powerful tool for removing explicit, documented barriers.
Like the shop class rule.
It easily dismantled the vocational tracking of shop versus home economics. It made it definitively illegal for a university to have a written policy saying women cannot enroll in physics.
Right, you can't point to a rule book anymore. You can't have a strict quota.
Exactly. But legal equality on paper does not automatically erase deep-seated cultural pipelines, societal expectations, and implicit biases. The enforcement of Title IXs in STEM fields has historically been much weaker and harder to prove than in athletics or admissions.
So even if the door to the computer science lab isn't legally bolted shut anymore, the hallway leading up to that door is just full of subtle cultural signals.
Yes, think about what a young woman experiences today. She isn't told she can't take advanced math, but she might be the only girl in her AP physics class.
She might face a constant low-level skepticism from peers or professors about her coding abilities.
She looks at the tech industry and sees a culture that is famously hostile to women.
The cultural signals whisper, "This room isn't really for you," even if the law says the door is open.
And that leads us to a broader modern paradox that we really must acknowledge. Today, women earn the majority of college degrees at every single level: bachelor's, master's, and doctoral.
They have entirely flipped the credentialing system of the United States.
Yet significant pay gaps and leadership gaps persist in the broader economy.
Which means the law granted access to the education, and women absolutely dominated that opportunity. But a diploma can't magically rewire the entire labor market.
It can't eradicate the implicit bias in corporate hiring, or the penalty women face in earnings when they have children. The credentials flipped, but the economic outcomes only partly followed.
It is a highly complex reality. And as we transition to the final major section of our deep dive, we need to bring that exact same level of complex, nuanced, historically grounded thinking to the most intensely debated battleground of Title IX.
The playing field.
Playing field. Because having seen how the classroom revolutionized, we have to look at the athletic revolution. And to truly understand this law, you cannot just look at the victories.
You cannot just celebrate the millions of girls playing high school sports today.
No. You must understand the strongest, most painful arguments made against how the law has been enforced. We are going to present the case against Title IX right now, and we are going to give it its full sympathetic weight.
We must model a scrupulously fair argument here. Neither side of this upcoming debate is the villain. We are dealing with competing visions of fairness, the reality of finite resources, and the unintended consequences of federal regulation.
So let's put a human face on the grievance. I want you to imagine you are a high school wrestler.
Okay.
You aren't playing a glamorous sport. You aren't going to the NFL. You spend your entire adolescence dedicating yourself to a grueling, solitary discipline. You are waking up before dawn to run in the freezing cold.
You're spending hours every afternoon in a sweat-soaked, windowless wrestling room.
You are meticulously managing your diet, dehydrating yourself to make weight for your class. You pour your literal blood, sweat, and tears into this singular goal.
And your immense dedication pays off. You are recruited to wrestle for a Division I college program.
You arrive on campus proud, ready to compete at the next level, ready to represent your university.
And then, during your sophomore year, an administrative memo comes down from the athletic director's office. Your program, the men's wrestling team, has been eliminated. Effectively, immediately.
Your dream, the brotherhood you built, the thing you've sacrificed your entire youth for is just gone. Erased by a spreadsheet.
Now, as a listener, let yourself feel the profound loss of that cut team. It is devastating for those young men. It is heartbreaking for the coaches who lose their livelihoods.
And this isn't a hypothetical story. This specific heartbreak has happened thousands of times since 1972.
Let's look at the devastating data for men's minor sports. Since the passage of Title IX, more than 450 college wrestling programs have vanished.
450.
If you look at NCAA schools specifically, the number of institutions fielding men's wrestling dropped from 342 in 1984 to about 228 in 2006.
That is a massive systemic contraction of opportunity. And wrestling isn't the only casualty. Let's talk about men's gymnastics.
A sport that requires unbelievable strength and agility.
And it is bordering on total extinction at the collegiate level.
The numbers are incredibly stark. In 1969, there were over 200 men's gymnastics programs across the country. By 2020, that number had collapsed to roughly 12 to 15 programs nationwide.
Just 12 to 15 left?
And the loss accelerated even recently When major historic programs like the University of Iowa and the University of Minnesota drop the sport in 2020, it represents a decline of over 90% of the opportunities in that sport.
Men's swimming, diving, tennis, track and field, they've all taken major hits over the decades. Just looking at a 5-year window between 1992 and 1997 alone, over 200 men's teams were cut across the country.
That erased more than 20,000 roster spots for male athletes in just half a decade.
So what is driving this mass extinction of minor men's sports? Why is the wrestler losing his team?
Well, the critics and the coaches and the athletes point directly to how the federal government chose to interpret and enforce Title IX. Specifically, they point to a document issued by the Department of Health, Education, and Welfare in 1979, known as the Policy Interpretation.
This is where we get into the mechanics of the friction. The 1979 policy interpretation established a 3-part test for schools to prove they are complying with Title IX in athletics.
And the primary battleground, the absolute center of the grievance, is the first part of that test, known as the proportionality prong.
Okay, so the proportionality prong states that an institution is providing non-discriminatory athletic opportunities if the gender breakdown of its student athletes is, quote, substantially proportionate to the gender breakdown of its overall undergraduate enrollment.
Yes.
Wait, let me make sure I understand the math here. So it means if a college's general student body is exactly 55% female and 45% male, then the athletic department must engineer its sports rosters so that exactly 55% of the athletes are female and 45% are male.
Substantially proportionate, yes. The athletic roster demographics must mirror the campus demographics. And this is where critics, including organizations like the Pacific Legal Foundation, the American Sports Council, and the National Wrestling Coaches Association, raise a very serious, mathematically grounded objection.
They argue that this proportionality requirement acts as a de facto quota.
They do. They are saying it forces a strict statistical outcome regardless of any other factors. And if a school looks at its numbers and realizes they are out of proportion, say, their student body is 55% female, but their athletic department is 60% male, they have a problem.
The federal government says they are out of compliance.
So what is the fastest, cheapest way for an athletic director to fix the math and achieve that safe harbor of proportionality?
Well, it isn't to spend millions of dollars building new facilities and creating new women's teams from scratch.
No. The fastest way to balance the spreadsheet is to simply eliminate the male athletes. Cut the minor men's teams. Cut the wrestlers. Cut the gymnasts.
This mathematical pressure leads into another highly debated claim made by the critics, the interest gap claim.
They argue that the proportionality prong rests on a flawed foundational assumption. It assumes that men and women, in the aggregate, naturally seek out competitive collegiate athletic opportunities at the exact identical rates.
Which is a huge assumption. The critics argue, what if they don't? What if, statistically speaking, due to a complex mix of socialization, biology, or culture, there is a natural difference in the aggregate demand for competitive sports between the sexes?
And if that is true, if men inherently seek out these spots at a slightly higher rate, then pegging athletic participation mathematically to the general enrollment punishes a real, natural difference in demand.
The core of the grievance is that by strictly enforcing proportionality, the government has taken a law designed to prevent discrimination and turn it into a mandate that demands strict statistical balancing,
resulting in the direct, measurable harm of male athletes. They argue it has become a system of preferential treatment. They took this grievance all the way to federal court, and the pressure was so intense that the Bush administration convened the Commission on Opportunity in Athletics in 2002 to formally review how the law was being enforced.
This is a powerful, sincere argument. If you care about fairness, the loss of 450 wrestling programs has to bother you. The tears of the gymnasts whose program is cut are real. It is a genuine grievance.
It is.
So now, as students of history, having felt the weight of that argument, we have to turn the gem over and look at the other side. We have to answer this grievance, and we have to do it without strawmanning the critics or dismissing their pain.
If the pain of the cut wrestler is real, and we have established that it absolutely is, the crucial historical question becomes, who actually holds the knife? Who is making the active decision to cut that team?
Let's state a crucial, foundational fact of the law very clearly, because this often gets lost in the emotion. Title IX never orders a single men's team to be cut.
The 37 words don't require it. The 1979 regulations don't require it.
In fact, the Department of Education issued specific clarifications in 1996 and again in 2003, explicitly stating that eliminating men's teams is a choice made by the school, not a mandate from the federal government.
Furthermore, It is vital to remember that proportionality is only one of three ways to comply. It is the first prong. But a school can also comply by showing a history and continuing practice of expanding women's opportunities. That's the second prong. Or by showing that they are fully accommodating the athletic interests and abilities of their female students, the third prong.
And, most importantly, if a school chooses to use the proportionality prong, they can always achieve that balance by simply adding women's teams and funding them properly, rather than cutting men.
So if they have the legal option to comply by adding, why do they cut? Why are the wrestlers and the gymnasts losing their teams while the athletic director blames Title IX?
This is where we have to follow the money. And when you follow the money in the ecosystem of American college sports, you run headfirst into a massive, immovable asymmetry.
College football.
College football.
The budget math is the key that unlocks this entire puzzle. Let's look at the footprint of a major college football program at the Division I FBS level. Historically, a program carries 85 full scholarship players.
But when you add walk-ons, practice squads, and red shirts, the actual roster is often 100 or 115 men.
And here is the crucial point for the Title IX math. There is absolutely no female equivalent to a 100-person, 85 scholarship team in the athletic department.
Women's rowing or track might be large, but nothing comes close to the sheer demographic weight of a football roster.
And the demographic weight is only half the story. The financial consumption is the other. The resources consumed by that one single team are staggering. At a typical Division I FBS school, football and men's basketball consume roughly 83% of the entire men's athletics budget.
Let that sink in. 83% of the money goes to two sports, leaving the remaining 17% to be divided among the track team, the swim team, the wrestling team, the tennis team, the gymnastics team, and the baseball team.
So put yourself in the shoes of an athletic director. You look at your proportionality numbers. You see you need to balance the ledger to comply with civil rights law. You have a choice.
Right.
You can reduce the massive bloated footprint of the football team. Maybe cut the roster from 115 to 85, maybe reduce the travel budget. Or you can eliminate the minor men's sports on the margins. Historically, they almost always choose the latter.
It's like a family budget. It's like telling your youngest child they can't have a $100 bicycle because the family is out of money and we have to tighten our belts, while the oldest child is driving a brand new $80,000 sports car that the family pays the lease on every month.
It's not the bicycle's fault the family is broke. It's a choice about how the family decided to allocate its resources. The athletic departments consistently chose to protect the sports car.
The historical records provide a very stark, very literal example of this exact budget choice. In 2006, Rutgers University eliminated its men's tennis team.
They released a statement, ostensibly citing budget constraints and the need for Title IX compliance. The narrative was that the tennis team had to be sacrificed for equity.
Yet that exact same year, Rutgers spent approximately $175,000 on pre-game hotel rooms for its football team.
Wait, pre-game hotel rooms? For home games. They put the team in a hotel when the game was on their own campus.
Yes. It is a common practice in major college football to isolate the players in a local hotel the night before a home game to control their environment and keep them away from campus distractions.
And that $175,000 line item for a luxury amenity was larger than the entire annual operating budget of the men's tennis team they had just eliminated.
That is the smoking gun of the budget argument. The money saved from cutting these minor men's sports usually doesn't even flow across the aisle to create new women's teams. It flows upward to protect and inflate the budgets of football and men's basketball.
The wrestler wasn't sacrificed to fund a women's volleyball team. He was sacrificed so the football team could sleep in a hotel rather than their own dorm rooms before a home game.
And when the university presidents and athletic directors make these brutal budget choices, it is often much easier from a public relations standpoint to point the finger at Washington.
To blame a federal civil rights mandate and say Title IX made us do it.
Right, rather than stand before their student body, their alumni, and the cut athletes, and admit that they chose to prioritize football amenities over fielding a broad-based, diverse athletic program.
Okay, that completely recontextualizes the math. But what about the other pillar of the critique, the interest gap claim?
Right, the idea that women are just naturally less interested in playing competitive sports, so forcing an equal number of roster spots is inherently unfair.
The courts actually had to tackle this exact argument head-on, didn't they?
They did, and this brings us to one of the most important legal precedents in Title IX history, the landmark 1996 case, Cohen v. Brown University.
Brown University was sued by its female athletes after the school demoted women's gymnastics and volleyball from varsity to club status to save money.
And Brown's defense in federal court relied heavily on the interest gap theory.
So Brown's lawyers stood up in court and argued, we shouldn't be required to fund these women's teams or reach proportionality because our female students simply expressed less interest in participating in athletics than our male students.
They essentially tried to legally prove that women just didn't care as much about sports.
Yes, they brought in surveys. They tried to mathematically prove that the demand just wasn't there among the female student body. But the First Circuit Court of Appeals rejected that defense completely.
Why? If a survey shows fewer women want to play, why did the court reject it?
Because the court recognized a fundamental sociological reality. Opportunity shapes interest. You cannot accurately measure the innate natural demand for an activity in a society that has spent decades actively discouraging half the population from participating in it.
Which brings us back to the medical myths of the 1970s, the lack of funding, the hand-me-down uniforms.
If society tells girls that sports are dangerous, unfeminine, and unimportant, of course fewer of them will check a box on a survey saying they want to play.
The historical record uses such a powerful framing for the court's logic. It says, you cannot starve a thing and then cite its thinness as proof it was never hungry.
That is the brilliant essence of the ruling. Measuring interest under a discriminatory status quo just measures the effectiveness of the discrimination.
If a school and a society offers far more opportunities, resources, cultural validation, and scholarships to male athletes for decades, you cannot suddenly take a poll, look at the resulting lower interest among women, and claim it is a fixed biological fact.
The court ruled that as opportunities for women expand, the interest rises to meet them. And the explosion of female participation in the decades since, from 294,000 to millions, proved the court exactly right.
And what about the lawsuit from the National Wrestling Coaches Association, the group that sued the Department of Education claiming the proportionality policy itself was an illegal quota?
That lawsuit ultimately failed. It was dismissed by the Federal District Court in 2003, and that dismissal was affirmed by the D.C. Circuit Court of Appeals in 2004. And the reason for the dismissal is crucial for understanding how the law actually works. They lost on the legal grounds of standing.
Okay, let's define standing